Good morning and welcome to this Construction Management and BIM Plus webinar. This session is entitled Construction Information, How Do You Manage Yours? In association with Ideagen Mail Manager. Our programme today, how did NG Bailey develop its own information management tool? In this webinar, you'll hear how the MEP specialist tackled its information management challenge. NG Bailey's information management tool is saving time and eliminating human error. Ideagen Mail Manager will focus on an often neglected part of information management, email management. There'll be a Q&A session at the end. Let me introduce our speakers this morning. Paul Marsland, Chief Electrical Engineer and BIM Systems Development Director at NG Bailey, and George Emeny, Senior Client Manager at Ideagen Mail Manager. I'm Justin Stanton, Editor of BIM Plus, contributor to Construction Management. I'm your chair this morning. Some housekeeping. As usual, please use the Q&A function to ask questions, not the chat function. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions. You can ask questions as yourself or pose them anonymously. Our panelists will address the questions in the Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand via the original registration link a little later today. There's 1 hour's CPD credit for those who complete this webinar live. CPD credits will be issued later today. You can only qualify for CPD credit if you are watching via your own registration link, not someone else's. That's enough of that. So let's crack on. Paul, if you're ready, can you turn your camera and mic on and share your screen?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Marsland. I'm the Design and BIM Development Manager from NG Bailey. So I'm going to discuss with you this morning and show you the information management toolkit that we've developed within NG Bailey. So we're going to look at some of the drivers for information, understanding the challenges and agreeing information requirements. And then we'll have a look at the information management toolkit. And if we get time at the end, I'll do a live demonstration of the toolkit, and then the questions and answers will follow after the session. So information is at the heart of BIM, and there's a host of standards and guidance and documents that can define or help you define your information requirements, ranging from COBie, the IFC data schema, of which COBie is a subset, and then some more recent standards, BS 8644, which is known as FIRI standard. There's a health and safety standard, ISO 19650, Part 6, which is not yet published, but it will replace the UK PAS 1192 Part 6 standard. And all these standards help to structure the information that would go into the golden thread. There's also, on top of that, there's client-specific requirements, which tend to be piecemeal. They may take a bit of COBie, a bit of health and safety information, and their own requirements. So requirements for information can be quite complex. So on a number of recent projects that we've done, the actual requirements from the client have been for an IFC deliverable. The information requirement has been COBie, but the requirement has been for an IFC deliverable. And it's been quite complex how that information has been passed through to us in the EIR. So on one of the projects, the EIR was an online database system that basically replicated the IFC standard and all the IFC property sets. It was very all-encompassing. A similar project that used COBie data used IFC as the main definer, but it was COBie data sets embedded within that in the way it was defined. So it can be quite confusing to actually understand and interpret what the requirements are before you start. So what tends to happen is the guys that are managing the project busy to get on and make a start on the project, and the data requirements aren't seen as important at the start of the project. They normally get swept under the carpet, And normally I get involved in the projects towards the end when we have to start pulling all the information and the requirements that the clients want, so we can hand that data over. So to actually start to look at the requirements, I've just put 3 typical M&E objects on the screen there: an air handling unit, a main LV switchboard, and a fan coil unit. Each of those items are actually assemblies of other components. So an air handling unit will have motors in there, it may have light fittings in there, it will have cooling coils, heating coils, humidifiers. It's got a whole series of equipment in there. And if we look at that to an IFC schema, where we've got things like IFC actuator type, alarm type, coil type, controller type, we may get a specification that's asking for detailed information on all those IFC elements, but those elements exist within other properties. So you've got to be clear where the information begins and ends. So if you want to give information just purely about the air handling unit and not the components, that has to be quite clear, because that's not what the documentation could be interpreted as meaning. Similar for a main LV switchboard, there are circuit breakers and controls and all sorts of other bits of equipment within inside the main LV switchboard, and none of these pieces of equipment would be replaced in their entirety. It would be the components within them that would be replaced. So we've had projects where we've had to split objects up into the component parts, because that's the way the client actually manages those assets through his FM system. And it can get more complex than that. So if we just look at valves, for instance, valves can range from a very simple isolation valve, of which there'll be thousands on the projects, up through to the most complicated control valves. So when somebody writes a requirement for information against valves, what you need to be quite clear of is exactly which type of valves that the information is required for. If we look at the IFC standard, within there are a number of types of valve, quite a lot of different valves, and the way the IFC standard is structured is the IFC valve type inherits up a tree, and the data for the IFC valves could come from any of those elements that come from that inheritance. So to sort of zoom in on that a little bit clearer, if we take a boiler, for instance, everyone's familiar with a boiler. There are 2 IFC boiler types, a steam and a water boiler. And if we look at the inheritance tree, these are the text in red is actually where the boiler inherits from. The blue text is the property sets, and the green is actually the individual properties that you could provide against that boiler. Now that's just the IFC schema. So if you add on to that a client-specific schema or some other schema, there's quite a lot of data that could be available for a boiler. It's not to say you would want it all. That would define that would come from the project requirements for information as to what needs to be supplied. So within NG Bailey, our sort of process is that, first of all, we need to understand the requirements, which can be quite complex. And once we understand them, we challenge them and we challenge them again. And what comes out the end of that, we then agree and try and document those requirements unambiguously. Because once we've actually agreed to deliver a piece of information, it should be treated no differently to delivering a physical piece of equipment like a radiator on a wall. The client's wanting that information, he's paying you to deliver that information, you've challenged it, so we need to deliver it. So looking at the Bailey Information Management Toolkit, the toolkit has been developed to assist us in collating and structuring the data that we have within a BIM model. And the problems that we have, the BIM coordinator is the engineer that actually produces the model, or the team of engineers that produce that particular model. Their engineers have a task to coordinate the detailed engineering requirements within that project. The information that goes with those objects, those assets, and that thing could come from a number of places. It could be the design engineer, the project engineer, the quantity surveyor, the installer, manufacturer. So there's a whole host of people that feed into that, and it's quite inefficient to have that information passed backwards and forwards to a BIM coordinator for inputting into the model. So what we did with our toolkit, we looked at how could we give access to the information to those different people. So what our system does, it splits the data from the BIM authoring tool. So within NG Bailey we use Revit, so we can split the data from Revit and host that in a cloud server. And we've got a suite of tools that sit within Revit and a suite of tools that sit within the cloud server, and we can synchronize the data between the two. So within Revit, we have an interface that allows us to extract that data, push it onto the website, and then once it's on that website, we can manipulate it. And what we're trying to do is either automate or collate that data in a very efficient, fast manner. So once we've actually pushed the data onto the website, there are a couple of main aspects of the toolkit. We've got the type data and the management of the type data. We have management of instance data. We have a mapping database and lots of other utilities that all assist us to collate that data. We also have a model viewer that we've developed, which is a mobile viewer. So it's a file format that we've kind of developed ourselves. It takes a snapshot of the model, or it takes a version of the model in a format that we can push out to a mobile device or a PC or a handheld device. It's a very lightweight version of the model, and through that we can interact with it. We can click on the objects and attach the data to those objects, and then synchronize it back into the Revit model. So the mapping database that sits behind it all, we use Uniclass as our main classification element. And from Uniclass, we link to SFG, NRM3, IFC, NBS, Guide M for life expectancy. And we also have a number of fields that allow us to automatically name objects within a project standard. And we've also looking at, in the future, we're looking at storing embodied carbon within the database, so that we can actually start to evaluate how much embodied energy we've got within the objects that we're providing. So within the actual input form, the user is presented with all the assets. Once they've exported them from Revit, all the assets are available. They're searchable from within an interface. All the data is validated in real time. So anything that's entered into the system, it's instantly validated. And there's also instant feedback as to whether the data is complete or not complete. We've integrated it with Uniclass, so we can look up Uniclass codes directly. We can look up SFG20 codes, and we've also got an interface with Lookings Live. So if the object has a TSI code or a product code against it, we can look up that data, and we can merge that data and suck it into our data system. The TSI looking system also contains catalogs and technical information, which can be pulled into the model and associated with it. So when we actually produce COBie, we can actually pull all the documents into the COBie spreadsheet. We get accurate real-time dashboards giving all the stats. So at the start of a project, there may be no data in there, and as we add data, we can see the progress as it comes, and we can do that right down to every individual parameter of every individual instance, and get those statistics. I can show you that on the live demonstration. This is a project that we recently did. We had to deliver COBie information, but it was delivered via IFC. So we delivered IFC that was federated, and the COBie was produced by the client. And this is the analysis of the data. So once he's run it through his model checker, use Celibri to validate that data. And you can see there's over 282,000 pieces of data that were checked, and there was multiple models on this project as well. So it was a significant amount of data that we had to provide. This was one of the checks run in the very early days of the project, where not a lot of the data was there. And you can see that through managing that data, we managed to populate and deliver on that requirement. We've also built an IFC product data templating tool into our data systems. So this allows us to store a specific data set, produce a product data sheet based on IFC data. So we can select which property sets we want and which data we want out of each property set, and even who the responsibility of provide that data is, and then produce a schedule, and we can add comments to that schedule and publish it, and we use that for feeding back. So I'm going to escape out of this, and I'll go on to our system live, and I'll give you some demonstrations of how the system works. So this is a sample model that we've built in Revit. I don't want to work on a live model in case we ruin any data, but this is a sample model. And when we run the tools within Revit, we would run the tools, we can export the data, and we can export the data from any particular data set. So there are certain data sets that come with Autodesk. There's SIBSI PDTs. MBS have their own shared parameter files for Colby data, so the BIMstone CoBuilder, or we can export the data by name, or we can actually upload a specific or select a specific shared parameter file, which will then pull all the data out of this model. We can actually go down the whole lot of them, and what we find is when we produce a model and it's being worked on by multiple people, you find that you've got the same data in different data sets right throughout that model. And it can be quite difficult to actually get all that data into a consistent data set, so you can actually either structure it for an IFC export or produce the data in the format that the client requires. So using this tool, we could just export the data, and then we can just fill the empty parameters in and go down each data set, and that will pull all the data into a common data set. We can run this often. If the model is progressing, we can choose just to update new types. When we import the data, there are 3 models associated with this project. They just test models. We can import the data from the model that it belongs to, or we can import it from another model. So if we populated the data, if we had a model that was, say, representing three buildings, and they all have the same elements in there, we only have to fill the data in once, and we can share it. There are also a number of utilities within this feature for naming families and naming systems and naming instances, and also correcting IFC types. So the mapping database that we have online, let's just say all the objects in this model had been hard-coded with IFC 2x3 element classifications. When we export that to IFC, if we had to export it to an IFC version 4, we would find that some objects don't export correctly because they're hard-coded. So we can actually update the IFC from between 2 and 3 or 2.3 and an IFC version 4, and that can write it back to the original object in your library if need be. We can upload a shared parameter file, so if we wanted a custom data set within our system, we can have whatever data we want within there. And there are also some Excel utilities where when we've produced Colby, because none of the utilities or systems can put spare and document data within a Colby spreadsheet, we can now merge it using this utility from the data we've collected. It's probably a bit obsolete, this, because we can now produce the Colby, and we can also produce Fiery data from our system directly. So to export the system, if I were to just update the whole system online, export the type data, I would just click export. It's exported all the type data. That's now been pushed into the cloud. If we were then to go onto the cloud, this is the sort of data that we've got. It will pull out all the categories out of Revit, and we can filter those. The filters here are stored by the browser, so if you set these filters and you come back to this page later, those filters will remain. We also have quick filters, so if I was looking for a transformer, for instance, I can filter on any column. These are 3 models. If I click the top model, it will just show the data for that model. Let's just log in again. Or a valve assembly, but there's no data being exported from that. These are just sample models with rubbish data in there, just for testing and demonstrating the system. What we have at the end of each asset is an object. So this would get us into the sheet for editing the data, and you can see if I were to change that uniclass code, oops, it would. It's not showing actually, which is very strange. It does validate the data in real time. I've actually just been playing with things, so I might have altered something that I shouldn't have altered there. I think your browser's there. So I just need to refresh my browser. So as soon as it's a non-compliant uniclass code, it will highlight it, and then as soon as it's a compliant code, it will be okay. But if I were to delete, say, the SFG20 code out of here, I can either look up an SFG20 code through our system. So this is an air grill. So if I were to type diffuser, I can select it from there. But because of the mapping database, if I were to delete that, I'll just go back because I've deleted the code as well. So if I just delete out the SFG20 code and then update that data, what we've got here is we can actually map SFG20 data. So it's now just said it's mapped 5 codes. So if I go back into it, it's now mapped the SFG20 data into that parameter. So that could do it for thousands of objects all in one go. So as long as we maintain the uniclass code consistently, we can map all sorts of other data through this system. We've also got the link to TSI. So if I pick something that's got a TSI code, these displays have got a TSI code in. Yep. And if I link to the TSI website, it will go away and find that code, look up that object from TSI. Any fields at the top here are one-to-one matches with the data that we're looking for. Any fields in the bottom are fuzzy matched, so it's matched material with material, it's matched colour with colour, even though they're spelt differently. But it will do a fuzzy match based on the actual name. It will also pull in documents, and we can either choose to import that data or not, or we can import the documents. So that document has now been imported to this particular object. And if you look in the documents tab, we've now got that object within the documents. We can add another document if we wanted to, and type an element in there, and that can be pulled into the COBie spreadsheet. And when we actually merge it with the COBie spreadsheet, we could also change the relative path to it, so that if those were stored on the client server, all those paths would be okay. We've got a few utilities in here that allow us to do edit data right across the field. So we've got the query builder, which allows us to pick all instances, names, and we can build an SQL query and update the parameters using that. If we go to the instances, this is the model viewer. That way. If we put it in COBie mode and select that transformer, you see we now got the instance data for that transformer. So we can't really do this from a table, because we could have 20 objects in the same room that are all the same type of object, and you won't know which one it was. But we can click on any object on there. We can update the data, and there's some custom data as well with this particular one. So this is planning data that we can capture within the model. If I went to the statistics, so I can look at the statistics by parameter, and that will just produce the statistics and a graph of the statistics, so we can see individual parameters, how many we've got to complete, how many are actually completed. And if I go to a project, get the number right. So that's what a project that's actually live at the moment. You can see that there is significantly more elements in there. So if I go to instance statistics, we see that we've got 19,800 instances in there, and this is the data that we're completing. The IFC property set element, by searching for, let's say we search for a valve, for instance, we can capture the data and classify it against the uniclass code, which gives us more granularity, or we can update it against the IFC code itself. So this then pulls up all the data sheets. This reads the data straight from the Building Smart data file. So the ones that are ticked is the projects where IFC was specified. This reads the specification, and it will check all the ones that the client is asking for, and we can either agree with that, add clients to it, or we can check and produce an IFC sheet and add comments to that. And as soon as we add comments, we can change the sheets. That allows us to look at the requirements and then unambiguously create them in a way that we can put them back to the client. We can produce COBie straight from one of these, or produce it on this project, because there are 1,000 of objects. If I go back to the sample project and produce a COBie workbook, it just gives us some options for the COBie workbook, how we name elements. We can create the spreadsheet, and that will produce us a COBie spreadsheet. And we can do that for Fiery as well, albeit the Fiery fields are not filled in yet. That's something that we're working on to add the input forms. We'll even pull out all the contacts that exist. So that's an overview. There are absolutely hundreds of tools within here, so we can filter and set custom parameters, set custom filters. So if we don't want particular, there's 3 models in here, but if we didn't want certain information to be collated against a certain model, we can take that off. It will remove it from the forms. It will also remove it from all the statistics. Some of the things that we can do, if we wanted to send out this particular object to the manufacturer to request it, we can click on this button, type an email address in, request the type data, send an email, and it will turn blue to say that information has been requested. Once that information has been completed, it will turn orange. And then when we synchronize it with Revit, it will turn amber. And if we hover over these, it will actually give us a full trail of who input the data, who edited it, and what date it was synchronized. So we get a full log of all the data within a project through this interface. And then once we've actually collated it, we can sync it back with Revit, and we can either output it as COBie or IFC from Revit, or we can output it from this particular system in various formats. We've also integrated it with MicroStation. And we also have an integration with a tool, another third-party tool that manages data, that outputs it in a specific format. We can read that format and merge our data with that. So it is quite flexible. And say if it doesn't do anything and we need it to do, we just develop it. The little ticks that you see here are just to indicate whether that data is fully populated. If it's amber, because within Revit there are no data validations, you can type anything in against a string, so it may be fully populated, but it may not be compliant. So the green tick means that that's filled in and it's compliant. The orange is it's filled in, but actually the data fields aren't compliant. And the red text on here, it's actually doing a validation against the type naming of the object as well. So it's validating that against the standard for the naming convention for the naming. So we can actually integrate or work to make the naming convention compliant. So that's a quick overview. I think my time's up there, so I'm going to end that. I'll go back to the presentation. So the information toolkit, just in summary, it avoids only the BIM coordinators and BIM technicians being able to populate data with models. It resolves inherent issues with duplicate multiple like data parameters. So when we actually merge the data back into our model, if there are multiple parameters there, it will populate each parameter because Revit sometimes just picks the first parameter it finds. It facilitates the production of properly structured IFC. It automates data input collection, and where possible, can map it with other systems. All data is correctly structured in real time. We get detailed reporting and monitoring via dashboards. And information can be unanimously, unambiguously and clearly defined and documented. And say future developments, we're looking at including embodied carbon, and we're also looking at within the database highlighting which Uniclass codes do require Fiery data. So when we produce the Fiery spreadsheet or the Fiery data output from the system, it will only contain those objects that are of interest to you. So there will be a question and answer session. I'll address that after the next presentation. Thank you for listening.
Paul, thank you very much. Seems like you've possibly made you and your team's life just that little bit easier. Thank you very much. If you can stop sharing your screen and then turn off your camera and mic, and we'll invite George to open his camera and microphone and share his screen. Once you're
just trying to work out how to do that, to be honest.
If you can, or if you are able to pop out of full, if you hit escape, perhaps Paul, to just get the PowerPoint presentation out of full mode, and then you'll be able to stop sharing your screen. There we go. Yeah, there we go. George, it's all yours.
Fantastic, awesome. Let me get this going. I think for a lot of people to be a bit of a serious knowledge dump of systems today. So but that was really insightful, Paul, to understand how your system works and a bit of an idea of how a lot of our clients in that sort of space work as well. Oh, I got one slide too many there. So yeah, as Justin said at the start, I'm George. I'm sort of part of the sort of team here to expand the business globally across the US and Europe as well, and including sort of the industries we work in, so architecture, engineering, and construction as well. And what we aim to do is obviously help unify sort of their project information in a more specific sort of space of email management. So what I'm here today to talk to you about is, to start off with, is the technology landscape is globally changing at an ever sort of increasing speeds. This is no different within the architecture, engineering, and construction space, and this is what we typically like to call the AEC industry. So you'll hear me refer to that a lot throughout this sort of session. But as I'm sure you've noticed in your own work, that technology is continually to rapidly evolve and drive the AEC and to become more safer, cheaper, and also quicker as well. Today, there are numerous examples of how new technology is revolutionizing the AEC sector. For example, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and also the BIM as well. There's no surprise that with everything going on in the world right now, and teams either working remotely or in a hybrid sort of setup, that it's becoming more and more difficult to actually access that correct project information when you need it. AEC professionals like yourselves, guys, they rely on strong, consistent communication. This might take the form of pitches, winning clients, and day-to-day communication with your colleagues. The days are sadly gone, or a bit limited, where you can actually sort of turn around with the person behind you and ask your colleague for that sort of bit of information or that bit of specification that's in the email, for example. What this means for a lot of people is they don't have quick access to the information they need, and they're typically left out of that communication loop. As you can all imagine, or you may have experienced in the past being in this industry, this tends to be a huge problem. With over, I think it's about 350 billion emails expected to be sent and received every day in 2023, and I think probably similar in 2024 as well. The email is the most used communication and collaboration tool across the world, but it's one thing that most people manage differently, and it's now creating huge risks for the future. I think email sort of grown so quickly that people don't have a sort of an accurate process in place for it. One of this risks always comes from project rework, and I think if anyone's worked in construction, that's sort of a dreaded thing. And a recent study found that 80% of project professionals spend half their time on rework, and poor communication costs £62 million or dollars every year on average. Rework doesn't just waste your time and of course money, but it causes huge communication breakdowns within your team and also your senior executive teams and also the key stakeholders, and tends to maybe ruin those client relationships you've built over those years as well. So obviously what I'm here to talk to you about today is obviously mail management. As a part of that, what we've done is we've conducted, or every year we conduct an annual survey called the State of the AEC Project Management Research Report. What this aims to do is discover the project management and collaboration challenges facing essentially your businesses globally in the AEC industries. The report explores how firms manage the project information, where they store it, how they go about retrieving the data when facing those legal disputes. In addition to this, it provides an insight to how the industry has been affected by the current global economy, including things like the cost of living crisis, supply chain issues, and also sort of the latest building regulations like the Building Safety Act and things. As you can see on the screen here, last year we surveyed around 550 companies in the AEC, sort of leaders from businesses around the world, with the majority of respondents coming from Europe, where you guys obviously all are, but of course the US and Canada as well. So without further ado, let's get started. I've got a couple of key findings here that I wanted to talk you all through today. So firstly, majority of the firms cannot access their information or their project information quickly and easily. We found that around only 10% of respondents were not concerned about their accessibility and visibility on their project information. So most see this as a big challenge. Secondly, I think over a quarter of organizations are at risk that when staff leave the business, there is challenges. Our research has found that more firms are aware of the importance of filing email as a part of the offboarding process when people leave the business than last year. So it's improving year on year. In 2022, less than half the respondents indicated they required to file all project-related information into a centralized location. This year, that number's risen slightly to about 58%. So that's great to see. But unfortunately, still 28% of people do not require emails to be filed. And in a lot of the instances, information is either lost or quite often inaccessible as well. And disputes are sort of continuing to raise year on year. In 2021, so we're going back 2-3 years here, the report found that 63% of respondents had experienced some form of dispute in their business in that year. This number is disturbingly actually risen to 91%. I think most from the call today would have experienced some form of dispute in their role or their business. And project scope changes and payments continue to be the leading causes of these disputes. And considering a lot of project scope information resides in email, and firms can't easily say that they can access this, it's hardly surprising that they are continuing to dig themselves into big trouble. And lastly, just on that point on the far right-hand side here, guys, email is still the most used, and most used communication and collaboration tool across the industry. So for the purpose of our session today, we'll be focusing on the disputes and the disputes angle of our research. And we'll be emailing everyone a copy of the full research report after this in the next couple of days. So you're all welcome to have a look at our findings and find out what we found. So according to the World Bank, we are currently in the second year of sharp slowing economic growth. I appreciate this probably came sort of last year, but I think it actually looks like we're sort of starting to go into the economic economic growth at the moment. In the AEC, we're seeing trends where costs are slowly on the rise, margins are tighter than ever, and where large staff cutbacks are sadly occurring. Even large firms have reported a huge drop-off in profits as their staff costs are increasing. And unfortunately, more and more firms are sort of going into administration, and more than ever, really. With so much uncertainty and so many people leaving the businesses, there is a strong need for organizations to think about their information management. How can you be sure that you and all of the staff have access to all documents and correspondence if a staff member is to actually leave? I mean, considering 28% of the businesses do not have an email filing process as a part of their offboarding sort of process, and 81% of firms use email as a majority of project correspondence, thousands of firms are still at great risk of losing that information. Even more concerning is that finding that 55% of those surveyed indicated that they do not have any email management system process in place. As I'm sure everyone on the webinar has heard today, or has heard in the past, or has heard someone say email is dead. But at least in our industry, these claims tend to be inaccurate. And we tend to sort of, and with a research report like this, find out that sort of tends to not be the case. In 2023, 88% of our survey respondents indicated that the overall volume of emails has actually increased in the last 12 months. This is a stark increase from the year before, and the contents of these emails are being more important than ever, with 11% of people claiming that it's now business critical. On top of this, almost 2/3 of AEC businesses regularly need to retrieve emails from past projects, with only 2% never having the need to retrieve emails. So over the last 3 years, this research report and these numbers have remained fairly consistent. In some instances, even started to rise here. Many can relate to not even to not always needing to refer to previous emails. However, only 1 or 2% actually never need to find emails. For many firms, emails and keeping them well organized and accessible is not a consideration until things typically go wrong. And as we see with these research reports, they hold vital information that could mean the difference between winning and losing a dispute. So unfortunately, guys, what we're seeing is that project disputes or project costs are continuing to spiral, and this leads to increased disputes within the AEC. Our research found that only 9% of people surveyed had not experienced a dispute in the past 12 months, and 63% of organisations reported experiencing a dispute in 2021. So this number rose actually, in fact, to 78% in 2022 and 91% last year. The top two causes were relating to project scope changes. So someone emailing saying, we never approved that change of project, but also someone chasing payments and said, where's our money? You guys have never paid us. Unfortunately, for the industry, issues relating to project scope changes are continuing to gain momentum. Why is this? Because the majority of 85% of information regarding scope changes is stored in emails and formal documents. To break this down even further, 12% of project scope changes do not reside in any digital space at all. So they're typically someone just saying verbally on a project site, can you make this change? And then the people are left with no record at all. And shockingly, 11% of respondents, guys, highlighted that there was only the only place that they kept all the project information was in the project manager's head. And in 2020, pre-COVID, this was 6.2%. So it's almost doubled, an alarming rate, which in the AEC is not great if the information is stored in the project manager's head. With the findings like these, it's hardly surprising that 90% of businesses are concerned about their project information not being easily and readily accessible. We're consistently seeing, guys, that failing to make emails visible and accessible in project teams can cause issues that relate to a legal dispute. So we've lent on Arcadis. They've done a global construction disputes report last year, and what they found is that the average value of a dispute was around $55 million US. And the average length is 15.4 months, which is an incredible amount of time and money there. Firms cannot afford to let information like email correspondence slip through the cracks. We typically see that the phrase have been coined the leaky bucket of emails, which is negatively affecting firms in the AEC globally. I think firms must always be aware that aware of their corporate history and be able to prove everything if there is a dispute, because as the stakes are so high, as we've seen in Arcadis' report, if you can't find that particular email because it's seeped through the bucket, you're going to end yourself in some hot water there. Given the nature of the industry that you guys, everyone on this call all operate in, firms need to guarantee information, visibility and accessibility to ensure that they are making the right decisions, and in the best cases, poor information management costs firms money, but in the worst cases, it makes people unsafe. Given the size of the global disputes environment, the cost of mismanaging emails is immense and includes information being locked in people's inboxes, staff wasting time looking for those information when they need to do their jobs, and staff leaving the business or going on holiday, but a range of important information is sort of trapped, or we say locked away in their inboxes. With proper email management processes, however, businesses can ensure that all project information and correspondence is captured and accessible by the relevant project teams. This will, of course, reduce the risk of rework, stop project disputes in their tracks, plus you'll have the information in your hands down the line should a liability dispute arise. So that's been a quick overview. I appreciate if I've rattled on a bit there of our AEC report last year. We'll send these out in the next couple of days, as I mentioned. If you're interested in it, have a read of it and get in touch with us a couple of questions. So what does this sort of mean information management-wise, and how can it help you avoid disputes going forward? So luckily, as Paul mentioned earlier, technology advancements are continuing to improve the way we work. And as I touched on earlier, AEC firms are increasingly to use tech to boost efficiencies. And BIM advancements means that team members can all be on the same page. They can use BIM in several benefits in the global AEC industry, including reducing waste, improving collaboration, enhancing productivity, time savings, and overall increased technology adoption. It's improving safety across the industry as well, and it provides a deep insight into those existing buildings that have already been previously built. So while all new tech standards like ISO, I beg your pardon, so while all this new tech and standards like the ISO 19650 are making our lives easier and really boosting the industry, we have access to massive amounts of data, both inside and outside our organization, that makes information management difficult. This sensitive and quite often confidential information is typically stored in documents and correspondence, and it can often be quite inaccessible, is probably the best way of putting it, stored in disparate locations by various departments and often offices. Information is the lifeblood of all project work, but often it's only well organized and accessible, secure and updated. And it's no easy task to actually achieve that. But what is the solution? So you need a single source or single place where you can access all projects and client information that is stored. You can see all this, it's a complete picture, and actually given the project you're working on, you need that sort of single source of truth. So the single source of truth, also known as the golden thread information, which was coined by the Building Safety Act, is a concept based around bringing all information together, ensuring that everyone in an organization has access to everything they need before making any sort of business critical decisions. A single source of truth provides a better method and sort of encourages more transparent communication. So this is helping organizations today drive change faster without compromising quality, and ensure that it does the project and client teams have access to the correct information when they need it, and if they need it, of course, as well. So managing project information in one place is critical to avoiding disputes, and when done right, allows teams to use their time, resources, and knowledge to the best of their the best of their ability to make the best decisions at the right time. The two easiest ways, everyone, guys, is to create a single source of truth by removing a manual process, because essentially when you have a manual process, people aren't going to follow that process of information sharing. But also what you can do is increase the information visibility across the board. So having a centralized location, maybe a CDE, a centralized digital environment where everyone can actually access this information. So one thing to keep in mind is that a single source of truth is not actually fully complete. Beg your pardon, it's not a single source of truth, and if it's not fully complete. So if you're not putting information into it, it's not going to be the truth. And what we've seen in our research report, while firms are stringent about how their information and documents and contracts are managed, email is often one thing it's managed sort of differently and in lots of different ways. So without the right tools and automation in place, project teams are left to their own devices. Some will move emails into the Outlook folders, some will put information on their desktops, and others will simply just delete information altogether, which is a big no-no, as we all know. Often in all these scenarios, that project information is trapped in silos and often inaccessible to a wider team. Losing access to essential emails or not including them in the overall information management strategy, as we've seen in the past, can prove really detrimental. When emails are managed correctly, however, everyone in an organization has access to the information when they need it to make the right decisions at the right time. And it provides a much better way of working, encourages more transparent communication, and ensures that all the team members have access to that single source of truth. So it's time to avoid all these common headaches of this email wasn't agreed, or this information wasn't agreed. When did you guys tell us this? John was left the company X years ago, so I'm coming in a bit cold to this. All of those excuses have almost got to go as we look to the sort of technology to improve on this. So some of the benefits of an essentialized information with emails includes your data being more discoverable, eliminating human in error and through automated workflows. It's establishing version control, reducing the amount of time wasted on searching and recreating lost documents. Those are just a couple, but as I go on through today, I'll show you how we can lean onto that with Mail Manager. So I guess I'll get on to why we're obviously talking to you all today. So we are a system called Mail Manager, developed by Arup Engineering, who many of you on the call today will be familiar with. But they developed the system themselves, and that's probably one of the best things I love about it, and a lot of other people we speak to love about it as well. Why do they do that? Because it's essentially because of the problems you can see on the screen here. So very simply, just going back to tell you a brief story, they had a lot of emails flying around their mailboxes, no consistent way of getting emails into that sort of golden thread information, that centralized environment. They tried to put manual process in place of drag and dropping. People weren't doing it. Information, inevitably gets locked away. No one can find it. Disputes arise, and you've not got quick access to the information. So what they did initially, funny enough, tried to just find something to pluck off the shelf, a quick fix, if you like. Couldn't find anything else to do this. Probably in a similar case to Paul's business. They actually went the other way and developed the system themselves. So this is just a brief snapshot of some of the customers that we've actually helped. So Gensler, we've done a couple of big research reports with them in the past and found that they're saving about 3 to 4 hours per user per week by using something like Mail Manager to streamline their email management flow. But these are a couple of our big companies, guys, but we really do range in terms of the company size we work with. Mostly, though, however, within the AEC. So what is it we actually do, and what are the problems we typically hear? So just to go from left to right here, often what we hear is there's a risk of losing sensitive information. I know people always say on the call today is, well, I can always find the email because IT have got a backup of it. Absolutely right there, and most companies do have that. But what I mean by that is you can't find the email. You know it's somewhere within the company, it's somewhere within someone's mailbox, but you won't have quick access to it, and therefore you sort of essentially lost the information. It's a bit like the way I always describe it is, I've lost my car keys. There's somebody somewhere in the house, but I don't know exactly where they are. Linking onto this, obviously, is wasted time spent searching and filing for emails. So we all work on contract hours or billable hours here, and what we don't want to be doing is wasting time searching for emails or even filing emails. And this time obviously can add up and obviously impact the amount of project work that you guys can take on throughout the year. And then on top of this, there's a lack of control. I think what we often hear is someone's inputted a process, no one's following that process, and the sort of management, leadership level feel like no one's actually listening to what they say. And what this leads to ultimately is information being locked in people's inboxes. There's not that quick accessibility in those disputes, or if there's an issue to happen, you can't actually find that important information. So I'll let you guys have a brief read of the slide here, but in terms of how we help our clients, we're going to make sure emails are found quickly. You're reducing the amount of time you're spending on email management. You're reducing potentially the dispute cost, because you may be able to find an all-important email that settles a claim nice and early without having to pay for anything. But also what we're going to do is make projects safer by unifying that project information. So similar to what Paul's just done, I'm going to hop onto a live demonstration, show you all exactly how the system works, as you've got a brief idea of it. It's worth mentioning, everyone on the call, so if this does look irrelevant and anything I've spoken through today sort of is ringing bells, then get in touch with us. I'm sure we'll send across some information after this, and we can run some more in-depth demonstrations. I appreciate the one I'll show here will probably be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. But let me get open my my Outlook here, and I can show you exactly how this works. So hopefully what you can all see here is my Outlook. At first glance, what you'll see is that my Outlook won't look too dissimilar to yours. So what we're doing here is just adding a simple plugin. So really simple, really effective to use. Implementation essentially takes half a day. It's brilliant. There's no downtime at all. It's very easy for people to use. The main aim of Mail Manager is to get emails out of people's mailboxes and filed centrally to a centralized location. And what we're going to do is we're going to file it into your existing project folder structure. So we're not going to host the emails. We're going to file it into your existing project folder structure. So what I'll show you today, guys, in a quick tour is how we simply file emails to the project folders, but also how you search for it as well. So I'll take an email here from Zach. I'm going to say something like, thank you for the update. There has been a change to the roofing plans. Please call sub Contractor. So quite an important directional, scope change email there. That usually gets sent out and doesn't get fired away. And as we've seen in the past, it can come back to haunt a lot of businesses. So with Mail Manager, as soon as you click send to an email, what you're going to be greeted straight away here is a prompt that tells you to really nice, neat and tidy prompt here that tells you to follow that email. Get your filing consistently, get your following a process. And it predicts the location here. So you can have 4,000 projects, tens of thousands projects here, but it's going to consistently bring that correct project to the top of the list as a suggested location to file into. So you check it going to the right one, click send and file there. That then sends the email out and files away both copies of that email. So that's going to file away both copies, and you're left with an orange tag on it to tell you it's been filed away there. Now, what we can do here is actually now to retrieve these emails is every user here is going to have access to this search tool. So to access that, you press that button there, and that is actually going to open up this search window here. I've got this open in my other window. I'm just going to bring that across. So what this is going to give me, or give our users a view of, is all of the emails across their organization. So I'll have access to, once this loads up, about 650,000 emails here. Most of these emails I've never been involved in, but I'd be able to search for these emails through here in 2 or 3 clicks. So these are all the emails across the whole business. So to give you an example of how you can use this, let's say you're working a project, there's an issue with an invoice, which, as we've seen in the past, is a big cause of disputes. You can go in here, type in invoice. I'm going to go into invoice there. That brings up every single email with a keyword being on it. So that's sort of our keyword search bar. I'm going to go into our project folder being Gensler. Say yes to attachments being on the email. Just what I'm doing here is showing you how you can filter it down to find that all important email. And I'm going to say that Georgina was included on that email as well. So input names, date ranges, anything like that. Preview an email with the whole chain of communication, but also actually open it up from the original, from the file server, from your SharePoint, from the project folder, and reply to it. And not only find it, but also action it as well. I appreciate I'm tight for time, and that was probably a bit of a whistle-stop tour, guys. But if there's any questions, we'll send across some information after this. So you're more than welcome to get in touch with us, and we've got a great website with some more information. But yeah, get in touch with us, and if you've got any questions, let us know. But for me, just that's it.
Thanks, George. Okay, Paul, do you want to turn your camera and mic on, and we'll jump into the Q&A. You up first, Paul. So what was your information management tool entirely developed in-house? How long did it take? How much did it cost? What was the most challenging aspect of the development?
Yeah, it was developed completely in-house. We don't set out day one and define a whole system. It's probably been developed in blocks. So the original development was actually, we had a problem on a particular project where we had in total probably over 400,000 objects that we had to name to a specific standard, and that name had to include part of the IFC name, part of the M&E service name, and it had to have a sequential number that followed on, and that wasn't just the assets, it was all the actual fittings on the assets as well, and they all had to be numbered. We challenged that requirement, but it was necessary. It would have took months to do to actually do everything sequentially. So part of the tool was to actually automate that process. So what would have took us months and months to do, it did it within a few seconds. And that tool can be run again and again as things are edited and changed, and it will keep existing numbers and resequence the numbers and schedule everything. On the same project, we also had a real issue that there was so many different data sets, all with different GUIDs behind them within the Revit application, that there was data in the model, but nobody could get it out in a consistent manner, and we had to get it into IFC. So another aspect of it was to be able to read that data and all the specifications it was structured in the model with, export it out to one common location, and then put it into a structured way so we could actually export it out into the IFC. So that was probably the first iteration of the tool, and then as we start to use tools like that, we push them out to people, and the user will say, can we have it doing this? Can we have it doing that? And our tools tend to grow over time. And then, some features of the tool don't really have a graphical front end on them. They're just tools that allow us to do something that we need to do that we may think we'll never use that again. So we don't, it's written for a particular project to achieve something, but if it's something that's useful and can be used across other projects, we'll actually convert it and add it into the tools. In terms of cost, the sort of department I sort of work with in the central department is we can set money aside and a budget aside to develop something, but normally we would develop something to solve a particular issue, and that particular issue, the cost in doing it long-wind would cover the cost of developing the tool. So I say it's probably took over 2 years to develop the system as it is to date, but it's been done in every time we had a project, we develop a little bit more. And with our mapping as well, we map all the common elements. There are thousands and thousands of Uniclass codes to map, and there's different versions of Uniclass. We map them, and then there's a feature that I didn't show every feature, but we can run a feature against a project and it will scan the whole project, and if we want certain bits of information, it will tell us which ones aren't mapped. So we just then go into the mapping database, and we might map half a dozen or a dozen codes every time we do a new project, but over time they get less and less and less, and the more elements get mapped. So it's kind of an evolving process, really.
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned Uniclass there. So Edward Britton asked, how do you deal with updates to Uniclass 2015 during a project as your primary classification? Does this frequently break your mapping, or do you specify a version of Uniclass in the contract documents?
Well, the Uniclass wouldn't be specified by us. We do keep a database for every version, and we've actually got a tool that we can merge an old version with a new version, and it will just pull out the common codes. This is a very frustrating. I sit on quite a few industry committees, and one of them is BSI B555 committee, which looks after all the BIM standards in the UK. And Uniclass, I accept that it will grow as products come available and as new codes are required. That doesn't give us a problem if Uniclass is being added to. But what we found in the past is they'll actually switch codes around. So what was one thing is now used for something else. Now there are thousands of BIM objects that people have produced available from different libraries and different agencies on the internet. And some of those have got embedded Uniclass codes in that no longer relate to that particular object. So our policies, whilst we can deal with the older versions, we tend to upgrade each project to the latest version. I have actually challenged NBS on several occasions not to actually switch codes over. If they've got the mapping wrong, they've got to stick with it. I have had an assurance that they will only now add new codes to Uniclass, and they won't actually change any of the older codes, which that type of issue doesn't cause any problems whatsoever. Whereas swapping codes, it makes a nonsense of Uniclass in the first place. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen again, but it has happened several times in the past. Yeah. And quite a considerable number of codes have changed.
Is it possible to quantify the amount of time the tool is saving for NG Bailey?
Well, on one recent project where because we can split up the different responsibilities to input different data, so there may be certain information that the BIM coordinators input in, we may leave it down to site or the people who are doing the procurement and the buy-in to actually populate other bits of information. We may get some from the manufacturer. I read through an EIR, a set of contract documents. I looked at the requirements, and it probably would have been about 2 or 3 months' work to do that manually, and they had a naming convention on there. They had quite a lot of unique system coding requirements on there with SFG20 and other systems they wanted. So that it probably would have took about 3 months to actually comb through and structure that data correctly. The project's in 2 phases. I did the first half of the phase because I realized I've got some tools that we can do that quick with. It took me about 2 days to do all that data. So it can save a considerable amount of time. I say certainly on one of the secure projects that we did where we had over 300,000 objects to name, I just can't say I would have done that manually. It would have been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, okay. 2 sort of related questions. So does it require any particular buy-in from your supply chain, and how are clients reacting to it?
It doesn't require any buy-in because it can run parallel with the BIM model, and the data can be exported out and synchronized back in. So in essence, the client wouldn't even know we were using it. On some of the secure projects, we we have our own, within our IT security department, we can actually risk assess how secure elements are, and we undertake certain penetration tests on the software that we write. But on the project that we did, which was a secure project, we didn't use the instance viewer, so that the actual view of the model that we host in the cloud, we only use the type data because we deemed that was too much of a risk. But it does, we can put different security levels on there. So yeah, it's horses for courses, really.
Yep. Okay. Alrighty. A couple of questions for George about Mail Manager. Can Mail Manager back up Teams meetings?
So yeah, I mean, Teams meetings an interesting one. So we can't back up the recordings, but what we can do is we've got a Teams chat filer. So that allows, and that's a very recent product of ours that's come out, but allows you to actually file those Teams messages. I appreciate a lot of project information at the moment is not just in emails, but also in Teams messages, and that's sort of the way the world's heading. So what we can do is file those Teams messages straight into a project folder, but also with that search tool I've just shown everyone, you'd be able to access the Teams messages through there as well.
Does Mail Manager read documents attached to an email?
Yeah, it's always a concern of a lot of the companies we work with, is that we're going to access information and do something malicious with it. No, so the information is all sort of kept in the company itself's infrastructure. So we don't store the information, nor do we read it. The emails are sort of come into an individual's Outlook, and then they're filed to their own project management system. So we don't read the emails at all. We don't have access to it at all either.
How does Mail Manager manage permissions?
Yeah, another question that always comes up is someone going to read my dodgy emails? Is someone going to read my payslip emails and things like that? Yeah, so the permissions, the really simple way of looking at it is with the search tool. Obviously, it's a really detailed search tool. You don't want people finding emails you won't be able to. But with the search tool, it only searches the emails or in the folders that you have access to. So if you haven't got access to a project folder at the moment, you won't have access to it with Mail Manager. And that's the best way of looking at it.
Yeah, and that effectively answers the follow-up questions. How are sensitive emails such as from HR protected from being
Perfect.
searching? Yeah, so we can say we've answered that one. And I think you've kind of answered this one as well. But is Mail Manager cloud-based, or can it operate within an organization's in-house system?
Yeah, so I guess what the question probably is there is, does it work on SharePoint or cloud environments, or is it just file servers? We work on both, so we can work on SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, a couple of other project management systems we can file into, but also, as most of our clients are actually working on a file server, sort of our legacy clients are working on a file server, so network drives, we file into those as well.
Yeah. Okay. Dan Knight asks, can you have groups and subgroups, i.e. main project and specific stage correspondence, or would it have to be under separate projects?
I'm not too sure what Dan means by that question. So I might have to have a look and have a read of that. But so one thing we do with projects is the prediction. So if you're working on a project, we can obviously predict it. So you don't need to be associated with the project or do any sort of admin once the project started for it to start coming up as a prompt for you. We can start sort of, it's going to learn your filing habits, learn sort of where you'd like to put keywords and things like that, and it then sort of predicts it off that way as well. But likewise, we can also set up subfolders as well on our project. So if you've got sub projects and things like that, we can also file into those as well.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Quick jump back to Paul. And I've now lost the question I was going to ask you, which was, Paul, you mentioned that documents can be attached to items/equipment. Can this include routine maintenance requirements, manufacturer's information, and commissioning reports?
It could do. Say we can attach basic documents there. If you look at the COBie standard, most people just complete the type component and system for M&E elements. They do go to resources, job intent. There are a lot more tabs within COBie. You could, in essence, build a complete maintenance scheme around COBie. It probably if somebody wanted to do that, we'd probably try and push them more towards a maintenance scheme that exists, because you'd probably be replicating something like SFG 20, which is a maintenance scheme, an industry standard maintenance scheme. You're probably replicating something very similar into a COBie environment when it already exists, but it's possible to do that. I say there are a couple of elements that we've still got for future development on the system. We just haven't had the need to do them at the moment. So capturing that job and resource data is something that we can do very, very easily. It's just another addition to the system. And then if you understand how COBie works, you can understand that for every type object that you've got, an instance object that you've got, that can link to documents and spares, but each spare can then link to a task and to a resource, and you can tie the whole thing together so that the COBie sheet essentially becomes the whole maintenance plan. It's probably more designed for smaller projects. If you were looking at larger projects, the clients would normally have an asset management or an FM system in there with those tasks in them, and normally we're providing the data that would feed into that system as the raw data, but there's no reason why it couldn't be.
Yeah. And you talked about the future development for the tool, and you specifically mentioned the potential for including embodied carbon. Are there any other capabilities? And in terms of the embodied carbon, would you just be drawing data from the environmental certificates for the products, or relying on third-party data elsewhere on those? Or
this is something we're doing as a company initiative at the moment. It's embodied carbon is on everybody's lips. It's going to come. We're going to have to provide embodied carbon for projects. So we're just at the stage now where we're analysing projects and the classes of objects that we put within there, whether it's linear items, whether it's commodity end of line items, or whether it's main plant and equipment items. And we're looking at how we can calculate the embodied carbon in that. We've already done it across a number of elements. We have our own off-site division where we're looking at the products that come out of there to have embodied carbon calculations with them. So it's anything that's related to data or even calculations, because I say the information tool is just one tool that we develop. We have all sorts of other tools within NG Bailey that assist in design and other aspects of it. So we look at what do we need to do to get an accurate embodied carbon figure, and then how do we link that into a data system so that when we're designing, we could, for instance, say, well, actually, if we do this, we'll get one figure. If we actually were to design it this way, we've got enough data to actually be able to compare it. So my background or the degree I did was in sustainable engineering, and to do those calculations accurately, it would be very, very difficult. I think the industry is trying to do something that's damn near impossible if it wants it accurately. But if you want to gauge it so that you can say, well, if I want to compare this design against this design, which is the most, which would have the most embodied carbon in it, you could do a comparison and define or design a project so that you can actually determine the optimum solution. But it's always a balance. I say you've got some requirements for embodied carbon that will have you reducing the amount of steelwork, metalwork materials and that goes into your project, and then you've got other requirements that are now pushing to sort of oversize elements because the energy losses in use are less, and it's a balancing act. So it's something that we're just looking at analysing it, and we've got a sort of framework as to how we can achieve this in a meaningful way that will give meaningful data to our clients.
Excellent. All righty. And George, final two related questions for you. Someone asked, can I get a free trial of Mail Manager to see how it works within my firm? And Saeed asks, what is the price? So I think one's yes, and one is an offline conversation, but over to you.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah, so we do free trials of the system. They are a really good way to get a hands-on on the system, test it in your environment, see if it's actually a good fit. If that is relevant, you can download it from our website, and we'll get in touch with you and we'll help you install it as well. We want to make sure it's all installed properly, so we've got the best chance of potentially winning your business. So we'll do a really good job of installing it for you. And then on the price, with the price, it's difficult to sort of give a rough estimate. Sadly, we have a minimum users of 5. So if you're looking for one user, sadly, we won't be able to do it for just one. But the minimum user of 5, and the price is difficult to provide an accurate estimate for when there's so many different packages and things. But definitely get in touch with us. We've got a quote request form on the website. If you fill that in, we'll get in touch with you and give you a more accurate number.
Excellent. Alrighty. Okay. Time to wrap up this webinar. So I will move to the final slide. So as I mentioned earlier, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand a little later today via the original registration link. For more on NG Bailey, go to ngbailey.com. For more on Ideal Mail Manager, Ideogen Mail Manager, go to mailmanager.com. Our next webinar is next Wednesday, 29th of May, entitled Is Your Building Ready for the New Counter-Terrorism Law? Focuses on the proposed counter-terrorism in the built environment law, known as Martin's Law. That's in association with BBX. You can register for that webinar at the short link on screen. That's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/Martin's Law. Martin's Law as it appears there with a Y. It simply remains for me to say thank you to Ideogen Mail Manager for supporting this webinar, and thank you to Paul and George for your time and your deep dives this morning. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Good afternoon.